Dingleberg. What a silly name for a kingdom. And Dingleberg was a silly little kingdom, too. It was on a tiny island. So tiny it looked like somebody's shoe floating around in the ocean. In every direction was water. Acres and acres of it, as far as you could see. If you were ever lucky enough to visit this island kingdom, the first thing you'd notice was what a sunny place it was. The sun shone every single day. It shone down on the people and made them happy. It shone down on their hamburger gardens and made the hamburgers grow. And it shone down on the castle on the hill where good King Burger lived with his daughter the princess. For as long as anyone could remember, he had ruled Dingleberg, and it had been a bright, happy place. But, alas, one day, a dark, gloomy ship sailed over the horizon toward Dingleberg. On the deck of the ship was a dark, gloomy-looking wizard named Warts, and over the ship hung dark, gloomy clouds that seemed to move right along with it. The ship and the wizard and the clouds were dark, 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 and gloomy. As the ship came nearer, the clouds that were sailing along over it gradually covered the sun, and the light grew dim. A chill wind blew over the tiny kingdom of Dingleberg. The ship landed, and Wizard Warts got off. He started climbing up the hill toward the castle. He trampled through the hamburger gardens. He bumped into people without saying, "Excuse me." He didn't even tip his hat to the ladies that he passed. You can see what kind of wizard he was. When he got to the castle, he was stopped by a huge guard wearing a red uniform and a big, bushy hat. Wizard Warts asked the guard to bend over so he could whisper something to him. And when the guard did, Warts gave his nose a hard twist and jammed his bushy hat down over his eyes. As the guard danced around, howling in pain and holding his nose in both hands, the wizard rushed into the castle and through its halls to the throne room. King Burger was sitting on his throne, trying to eat a hamburger while getting a shave and a haircut from Seville, the traveling barber. Seville came to Dingleberg each month to cut the king's hair. The shaving cream had been getting on King Burger's hamburger, so he was not in a very good mood. Wizard Warts did not even bow to the king before he spoke. "King Burger," he said roughly, "today is your daughter's birthday. She is now old enough to be married, and I want her to be my wife." King Burger was so astonished that he choked on his hamburger. He coughed and sputtered, and behind his shaving lather, his face grew red as a beet. The wizard went right on talking, offering the king expensive gifts if he would agree to the marriage, and threatening to put a dark curse on the whole island if he did not. He said he was in a hurry for a wife, as the ironing in the dishes where he lived had not been done for years, and were piling up so that he could no longer get in the door. No wonder he was such a grouchy wizard. King Burger jumped to his feet and roared, "Enough! Get out of my castle and off of my island at once!" He grabbed the barber's shaving brush and threw it at the wizard. He would have thrown the hamburger too, but he remembered his manners just in time. Kings do not throw food, even at rude wizards. Shaking his royal fist in the air, he shouted to the barber, "Seville, if this wizard is not out of here in a wink, use your sword on him!" The young traveling barber was glad of a chance to serve the king, and besides, he wanted to marry the princess himself. He did not have a sword, but he started after Wizard Warts with his barber's scissors. Wizard Warts was out of the castle in a wink, pausing just long enough to stomp on the toe of the poor guard at the entrance. Keeping well ahead of Seville's sharp scissors, he ran down the hill and was soon on his ship and out to sea. "You'll be sorry," the wizard shouted back at Seville. "All of Dingleberg will be sorry." With that, he pointed a long, crooked finger at one of the dark clouds hovering over his ship. Then he chanted, "Dark and weary, sad and eerie, stay and make this island dreary." The gloomy ship turned slowly around and sailed back in the direction from which it had come. Although the wizard finally disappeared over the horizon, the darkness did not. The cloud stayed, blocking out the sun. It stayed there all that day, and the next, and the next, and the next. A month passed, and as usual, Seville the traveling barber stopped at the island to cut the king's hair. He found Dingleberg a completely different place. It was no longer full of sunshine and gaiety. The cloud was still hanging over the island, keeping it dark. He found the people worried. The hamburger crop, without sunshine, had begun to wither and die. A dying hamburger plant is a sad thing to see. Worst of all, the children were unable to play in the bright sunshine and grew unhappier with each passing day. Seville the barber learned that many ways had been tried to move the cloud. The old cannon standing by the gate of Dingleberg Castle had been pointed skyward and fired, but the cannonball had simply disappeared into the murk. Huge fires had been built, but the cloud was too high for the heat of the flames to reach it. Seville even saw people on their roofs, throwing things at the cloud, things like shoes and bricks and hamburgers, but of course this didn't do a bit of good either. When the barber reached the castle, he found the king slumped down on his throne, gazing sadly at a plate of withered hamburgers in his lap. Seville cut the king's hair in silence, trying to think of some way to help. About halfway through, he got an idea. "King Burger," he said, "as long as the cloud can't be moved, perhaps the island can be. One of my customers on another island, a giant named Mooche, just might be able to do it." King Burger brightened. "It's worth a try," he cried. "How big is this giant?" "He is so big, I have to trim his beard with a hedge shears," replied Seville. "And he has muscles like iron." "Seville," said the king, "I know that you have loved the princess and hope to marry her some day. If you can save the island, I'll not only agree to the wedding, I'll make you the royal barber of Dingleberg." That very afternoon, Seville climbed into his tiny boat and sailed off across the sea. When the people of Dingleberg saw his ship again a few days later, it was being pushed along through the water by a giant so huge that the sea came up only to his waist. He was so big that the children of Dingleberg ran into their houses and hid under their beds. They had no reason to be afraid, however. Mooche the giant waved to the people and smiled. He boomed out in his loud voice that Seville was his friend and that he was there to help. He took a huge rope from over his shoulder and circled the island with it. He tied the ends of the rope around his waist and tried to pull the island out from under the gloom of the wizard's cloud. He pulled and he strained. His muscles bulged and his face turned pink, then red. But the island didn't budge. Not an inch. The princess tried to comfort Seville. "You tried your best," she said. "I'm proud of you, even if your plan did fail." "Fail?" cried the barber. "I haven't failed yet. Mooche's brother Moore is twice as big. So big I have to use a scythe to cut his hair, and he has muscles like steel. We will get him to come and move the island." After resting a bit, the giant ate a snack of 482 hamburgers. Then, with Seville perched on his shoulder, he waded off in the direction from which they had come. They returned the next day with another giant, who was indeed twice as big as Mooche. He was so big that this time the women as well as the children ran into their homes and hid under their beds. The barber directed Mooche and Moore to get on opposite sides of the island. This time Moore pulled on the rope while his brother pushed. They pulled and pushed and strained. They grunted and groaned, but the island didn't budge. Not an inch. This time, the disappointment was too much for the princess. She broke into tears. "Oh, what will become of Dingleberg under this horrid dark cloud? Even Mooche and Moore have failed." "Failed?" cried the barber. "They haven't failed yet. Their cousin Moste is many times larger than they. So big I have to cut his hair with a horse-drawn mower." "Yes," cried Mooche and Moore. "Cousin Moste is much larger and stronger than we are. We didn't ask him before because he has the sniffles and shouldn't get his feet wet. But he'll come if we really need him." The giants had a short rest and ate a snack of 2,044 hamburgers. Then they waded back the way they had come, with Seville waving back at the princess from Moore's pocket. The next day they were back, followed by the largest giant ever. The ocean barely covered his feet, and his head towered so high in the sky that only the people living near the top of Dingleberg's hill could see it. This time even the men ran indoors and hid with their families. But even under their beds they could hear the huge giant sniffling and snuffling. A giant with the sniffles is a terrifying thing to hear, especially one who has just been for a long walk in a wet ocean. Seville shouted up to Mooche, "Ask him to move the island." Mooche nodded and shouted up to Moore, "Ask him to move the island." Moore tilted his head way back to shout up at Moste when it happened. Most started to sneeze. Ah, 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 he went. Ah, 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 achoo! A wind like 100 hurricanes swept over the island. It broke windows and it blew leaves off the trees. It blew hamburgers off the hamburger bushes and the king's crown right off his head. But something else happened at the same time. Something wonderful. For the first time since the visit of Wizard Warts, the sun shone down on Dingleberg. Warm, bright, happy sunshine poured over the whole island, for that powerful sneeze had blown the wizard's cloud clear out of sight. The people stuck their heads out of their broken windows in amazement. The king looked out the castle door and cheered. The princess saw the world suddenly brighten around her, and cried out in delight, "Dingleberg was safe!" That night a celebration was held. After a huge hamburger banquet, the king gave the largest medals he could find to Muche, Moore, and Most. He gave Seville the title of Royal Barber of Dingleberg, and pronounced to the people that Seville and the princess would soon be wed. On the day the barber married the princess, the sun shone down on Dingleberg brighter and happier than ever before. After the wedding, Moore supplied a fine wind for Seville's small boat, as the bride and groom started off on their honeymoon across a calm blue sea. And as they sailed out of sight, the princess whispered softly to Seville, "Aren't you glad that giants come in different sizes?"